Hello, my friend. Welcome to Reflections in Music, knocking on heaven's door. Rockin' reflections about songs that stir the spirit. Jesus is Just All Right is a song written by American singer Art Reynolds and first recorded by his group, the Art Reynolds Singers, for their 1966 album, Telling It Like It Is. The song has been covered by various bands and artists over the years, including the Byrds in 1969 and the Doobie Brothers in 1972. The cover by the Doobie Brothers is perhaps the best-known version of the song, since it was a hit in the United States, peaking at number 35 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in February 1973. In fact, Jesus is Just All Right was one of several religiously themed songs to reach the U.S. charts between 1969 and 1973. Which makes sense given the fact that this was the era of the Jesus movement that began on the West Coast in the late 60s and early 70s and spread throughout North America, Europe, Central America, Australia, and New Zealand. In 1991, I was in my first year as a chaplain in the Army Reserves. I was assigned to a MASH unit, so we often went to the field for training exercises. After a few days in the heat and humidity, and sometimes rain and mud, along with mosquitoes, ticks, and other pests one encounters in the woods, low morale among the soldiers was always a concern. As their chaplain, it was my job to try to boost their spirits and to offer them words of encouragement. I remember my first chapel service that I held in the field. Surprisingly, a big crowd showed up, including the commander of the unit. Throughout the service, the commander appeared to be lost in thought and not really paying attention to my sermon. Until, that is, I mentioned the song Jesus is Just All Right by the Doobie Brothers. He suddenly perked up and started listening intently to my message. After the service, he came over to me and said, "I really liked your sermon, especially the part about the Doobie Brothers. But where was the dessert?" I was puzzled momentarily by his comment, until realizing that being of the Catholic faith, he was referring to the Eucharist, what Baptists call the Lord's Supper. Unlike Catholics, however, who receive the Eucharist at every Mass, Baptists typically only partake of the Lord's Supper a few times throughout the year. The commander's dessert comment provided me with some food for thought, as I soon realized my chapel services would be attended by people of various denominations and faith traditions, some of whom were accustomed to receiving the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist at every service. I decided from that point forward to offer communion as often as possible, especially in the field. Sometimes a Catholic soldier would come up to me and ask, "Is it okay for me to receive communion at the chapel service?" And I would always reply, "Well, it might not be the same as when you receive the Eucharist at Mass, but I think it would be okay with God." After all, despite the many differences between Baptists and Catholics, there is one thing that we have in common, and that is the foundational belief that enables us to say, Jesus is just all right with me.
Jesus is just all right.